Hello. Welcome to a conversation. It's called The Story Matters, and what we mean by that is every story matters. And stories come in all kinds of sizes and shapes and places that you don't expect. So Susan is our guest today.
Hello.
And Susan, we started with an elevator this morning.
We did.
Talk a little bit about elevator stories.
Elevator stories. Well, we were going to come upstairs and deciding whether we're going to take the stairs or the elevator, and I realized that there's all these different times in my life where I take an elevator versus the stairs, and we talk about stories in the elevator, and I don't know, there's sometimes music in the elevator.
Okay. I didn't hum to you, did I?
You did not hum. We wound up talking about tattoos in the elevator, though.
We did. I mean, so you just never know. So let's maybe, to get some organization here.
Yes, sir.
Let's go back and ask a question. I like to ask a question about your experience as a young person. Were you a storyteller when you were young, or were you a story listener, or didn't you just even care?
I was a story reader, and I was thinking about this the other day. I read everything I could get my hands on, and I hung out in our local public library all the time. Got to the point where the librarians didn't even look up when I came in. I was lurking in the back. But I started reading, moving out. I've had favorite children's stories and things like that I would read again and again. I liked folk tales. I liked the hardcore non-Disney ones that had all sorts of horrible things that happened to the prince and princesses. But I read most of my stories, and then I started reading my dad's books. So in 5th and 6th grade, I was reading whatever my dad was reading, and he was reading things like James Michener, Roots. So a lot of things that were sort of above my grade level, but just were very rich in stories. And I didn't really think about telling stories as much until I was in high school, and I wound up I had read Anne Frank, and I wound up reading a lot about the Holocaust. Was very interested in individual stories, and we had, I think his name is Robert Clary. He was on Hogan's Heroes. I played Frenchie, and he was actually in a concentration camp, and he went around when I was in high school in the early 80s, telling his story, and he told his story to us in high school, and I was blown away by it. The fact that all these things that I had read had actually happened to this one person who was up on stage telling their story. It was very personal. He related a lot of information about what happened with him, and he left it up to us to determine what we thought about that, which was unusual in high school. We were normally told what to think.
Yes.
And I think that's when I realized that stories could also be verbal, and they were much more powerful in a verbal situation. And I don't think it really had occurred to me until then, which is strange.
Make that distinction. Your father was a reader.
He
right?
was a reader.
Was he a story reader?
He was a story reader.
And you followed that pattern?
Just kind of followed that
was
pattern.
He a storyteller?
He was, he was a joke teller.
Oh, okay.
And he was very good at it, to the point, and I was not good at jokes. His tended to be a little more colorful than my mom liked to admit. But he was very good at the pause and the drawing everyone in and waiting for that punchline and delivering it impeccably. And it was just fascinating to me, and I never dared to tell. I tried to tell jokes like him, and I could not. So I tended to be quiet and just enjoy his jokes. But stories, not so much. My parents would talk about what happened at work and things like that, but I didn't think about that so much as storytelling. It was just sort of catching up on the day.
Well, say a little bit more about the time when you discovered that there's a difference between reading stories and telling stories. You remember some things about that?
I just remember that how powerful it was, especially in that high school moment, hearing from that person. I mean, I had sort of talked about the Holocaust, read about the Holocaust, seen movies about the Holocaust, but to have someone who had lived through something, who was right there in the room with me, became very powerful. And then I sort of sought out other people who were telling those kind of things. And then I realized, probably in that sort of senior year of high school, early college, that teachers, more academic teachers in college and upper level high school, were telling their story a little bit differently than teaching. And that's when I started to realize that there was something else going on with stories, and then I just listened for many years before attempting to tell my own story. But I just really enjoyed, there's something different between when somebody was teaching something, when they were actually engaged in revealing something about themselves, or that was very special to them.
So is revealing the key word for you?
I think so. You're touching something, even as a listener, you're touching something that they want to impart, but they experienced, and it's a pleasure to go through that. Even if it's if it's a painful story, there's something gentle about it, that they're letting you in on that moment with you. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about stories so much until I met you, and you have this sort of opened up all the doors for storytelling for me, of that there are so many different ways of storytelling. I had always thought of it of conveying a story as you do in reading, and then telling a certain thing to someone. But I realize now my parents revealing their day is a story, and I hadn't really thought about it that way. I don't think I've answered your question, though.
It's all right. It's all right, because you've gone where you want to go.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
I think so. And when someone's talking and telling that to you, it's I like exploring with them. You know, like, where are they going to go? I don't know. Yeah. Let's find out.
Okay. It provokes that sense of mystery, right?
Yeah, and adventure.
And adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you ever talk to your parents about that?
No.
That wasn't. This all was part of your learning from living with them, right?
Yeah.
And watching how they lived their life.
Definitely.
Which is really amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about how you're suddenly invited into this process. I had an experience recently with an elderly woman, and I'm standing alongside the bed, and she looks up at me. The medicine came. She said, "Was that your medicine or my medicine?" And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure it was your medicine." "Oh, shucks, I thought I could get away with that." and I looked at her and I said, "You know, I like you an awful lot, but I'm not going to take your medicine."
I'm going to take your medicine.
And she smiled. She had this beautiful smile. She looked up and she said, "Oh, I suppose not." And it was a marvelous, totally unprepared, unexpected experience for a person who, for the most part, slept. You know, but then all of a sudden she was there, I was there, and the medicine was there.
She was being a little cheeky with
yes,
trying to get you to take that medicine too. And then she would. It just was amazing, you know. And when I would come to sit with her, she'd say, "Now, I want to make sure you brought your book." And I said, "That's very nice of you." She said, "Well, I'm going to go to sleep, and I don't want you to be alone." And yeah, but you're not. That's fascinating. I've done that, sat next to someone who's doing that, and seem very conscientious that I might be bored.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm prepared for that moment, and you wait for those moments where they're awake and you're ready to interact, and that's nice.
So you met some interesting people during your lifetime, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, who would you like to find
out? Without mentioning names, you know. What can you recall some of those fascinating people that suddenly were there because there was a story?
Well, I think one of the ones that changed my life the most was I got to actually meet the Dalai Lama. And because I was on the Middlebury Select Board, we all got invited to one of the last time he came, to one of the public speakings that he did. And it was lovely, and I had been going to some public talks. The Dalai Lama's, one of his arrangers of the visit had been coming and speaking in town, and this group that I went to, we all got invited to just sort of greet him afterwards as a group. And so it was wonderful. We got to stand in line after the talk, and we were all excited, and we weren't sure what was going to happen, and I had read up on all my protocol. And so I brought this little offering shawl that it said you're supposed to officially do. So I had my shawl out, a couple other people had theirs out, and we're supposed to offer it to him. Well, we all got taken into the room, and he was off on the other side. And there was about 50 of us, and we were just kind of standing there. I had my shawl, I was all nervous. And they announced that there was no time for anything except for a picture. And so we were all sort of processing that, and they were leading him across the room, and they said, we're going to set up right here, and they pointed towards me. And I was going to be the center of the picture. And they said, we want a whole bunch of you to kneel down in the front. And obedient as I am, I immediately kneeled, and nobody else did. They're all just kind of milling around. Well, they were bringing the Dalai Lama over. He's a little unsteady on his feet, and someone was holding his hand. And everyone was still having trouble behind me deciding what to do with themselves. Well, they led him over to me, indicated I should raise my hand, and they put his hand on my hand, and the helper walked away. And I had a few moments where he's smiling at me, I was smiling at him, and I'm trying not to crush his hand or let go either, and I'm trying to decide what to do. And meanwhile, they set the whole room up around us, and I really wasn't paying attention. And there was a woman in a wheelchair. They brought her over, and he decided he was going to hold on to the wheelchair, so he let go of me, and he made sure he wanted me to have a good spot, so he sort of moved me around the back of him and set me up on this side, and that's where I am in the picture. And I tell you, he didn't say anything to me, but he just looked in my face and smiled the whole time. And it was after his talk of how he greeted everyone as they were his best friend. I have to say, it was lovely, and I really just didn't know what to do with myself for a long time afterwards. So
the presence, I mean,
the presence of him, and just how sweet he was to everyone, and how he communicated so much without even speaking. Just very calm, and I'm not really sure how the room got set up around me, which I find all of a sudden I was just aware of everyone was there, and we had our picture taken, and he was whisked away, and that was the end of it.
Hey, marvelous story. Marvelous.
Thank you.
I would imagine, though, in your experience as a businesswoman,
yes,
and as a town official,
yes,
and parent, you've met some pretty ordinary people too.
I have.
And without mentioning any names, maybe any of those stand out, and did they end up with any surprises?
I think there's always surprises. I mean, I try, even when people are very ornery, I try and be compassionate towards them that they are just very upset. And I've been upset. I've been that upset that I really need someone to solve a problem for me. I think when it doesn't go well is when I am not the person that can solve the problem for them, or I can't solve it right there. And that just continues their frustration. I mean, I think so many times I worked for Ben & Jerry's. I ran the Ben & Jerry's in Shelburne for many years, and I always said to people, if they were so upset that I couldn't solve their problem with ice cream, that there was nothing I could do for them.
It sounds pretty hopeless if you can't solve the problem with ice cream.
And I wish for that sort of, I mean, there's many times with the town stuff, I wish I had some ice cream, because it would be a
Whip out your Ben & Jerry's.
I mean, I think so many times we're in that position where we're just so upset, and you know, I just try and help people as much as I can, or redirect them to the person who can help them. I think with customer service, anything you do, there comes a point where you have to be honest with people and say, there's nothing I can do for you. I've done everything I can for you. This is it. And that's a hard moment to be there and to kind of, and I'll not get any names just because there's been so many moments that I really can't.
Sure.
I mean, I've had to confess, you know, when something goes wrong with my products, you know, that I messed up, and that's a vulnerable moment. But I don't know. I think it's one of those times where you have to admit that there's nothing that you can do.
Right. And those are both humbling and growing moments, aren't they?
Yeah, and I wish the growing moments weren't quite so humbling. I mean, do you do that too in your work?
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
You know, those moments.
Sometimes there are people who are mad and or hurt, and but they don't want to admit it, or you're the closest person to them, and all of a sudden, you know, you're receiving the anger, and it's the lesson you learn is. It's the right lesson to learn, the hard lesson to learn, but it's a right lesson to learn. Yeah.
I mean, I spent a lot of time training people too, and my son this summer started working in food service. He worked at the Waybury Inn as a waiter, and I was so excited because in food service, it's the front lines of customer service. If you can work food service, you can do anything. Because it's so instantaneous that you know, you're out there and either they're going to have a good meal or they're not, and they're going to leave happy or upset. And you have so many moments that you can try and fix things, but at a certain point the moment is done. And the decision is made, and you get a tip or you don't.
So one of the ways that you my observation is that you, in dealing with people, two things. One, you try to make sure you have clarity, and the other is you try to make sure you have a chance to laugh. So can you comment on that?
I tend to, when I get nervous, I laugh a little bit more, and I've learned over the years to use that to my advantage, especially when things are tense. All of us appreciate, well, not all of us, but many of us appreciate a good laugh to dispel the tension. I don't mind laughing at myself, and I think that I try not to make someone else the butt of the joke. I will take it for myself before I do that. But I think so many times in meetings, you know, a good joke that's on me, that we can, I mean, especially one that's in a meeting. I'm trying to think of something, but
I know they don't come.
They don't come when I need them. there's times where, you know, where somebody uses a certain word, and later on in the meeting, if I can make a joke about that, and we can all have a good laugh, to remind us all that we're all humans in the room, is lovely. I mean, so many times, especially with the town office project that was going through, we had these long, intense meetings where people were very focused on telling their viewpoint and their story. That moment that, you know, I'd trip over the cord in the microphone cord or something like that, it's a delight to be able to share that and say, okay, we're all human, and I heard what you said, but I'm falling over in the back of the chair.
And they mainly get that, right?
I think so. I think some people, the humor can seem disrespectful to the moment, but I think as long as I'm not disrespecting someone else, it's okay to remind us all that we're here and we're fallible, and it's okay. It's okay to share a laugh and then move on to the serious work. Yeah, I try.
Well, it's the balancing of those two, both the humor and the clarity about what the situation is or isn't, what you can do or can't do.
I ask lots of questions.
Yeah, and that really does help, doesn't it?
I think so. I find that how else can I know if you understand what I'm saying, and how do I know if I understand what you're saying if I don't clarify something? Yeah. Are you saying this? And people go, of course. I'm like, okay, good.
Well, and that helps with the one that I appreciate is seeking for clarity, and and that is a very valuable gift if you can bring it to a group, get the group to come to that place, or the individual to come to that place. I wonder, could you tell the story of our float in the parade?
The MCTV float in the parade. I love doing that parade, and I don't know what happens to me. Sometimes I get very loud on that float and start celebrating and all kinds of things, but I love the fact that we come together as a board and decorate, hand decorate, or, you know, have just simple signs, but we put the TV camera and hopefully the video cameras up on the float and get to show everyone else who's in the parade audience up on the camera. And so I love that sort of duality of they get to not only see the parade but see themselves in the parade. Right. It's a wonderful thing, and we just get to wave and bring that moment to everybody else. Don't you just?
I do. It's what's fascinating is who sees it first. Right. Does the child see themselves on TV, and then they're trying to get the attention of their mother or their father? You know, hey, you know, look at me, and or do the parents see it? The image first, and then they're trying to get the attention of the child who's playing with sticks or
looking for candy,
and get their attention to look up there.
And it's a mixture.
And there's a whole marvelous set of drama going on in this whole process.
And I love the people who aren't expecting it at all, and then all of a sudden they see themselves, and they're kind of grumpy up until that moment. Yeah. They see themselves and they smile. Yes, and I love that moment. Right. I mean, the kids are so delighted, but it's so fun to see the adults who are like, and then they see the float and they're kind of, there it is, and then they go, and that moment to see yourself reflected back is, it's so much fun.
Yeah, it would be great. It would be a great step forward if you could go out and then talk to these people about their story and their response to why they responded this way and so
We'll
forth.
have to work on that for next year, do you think?
I don't know.
Man or woman on the street?
I'm all for getting the cameras back up on the on the truck and getting people. It's a really unique thing, and it has a lot to do with storytelling, because a lot of times when you get into a group, there'll be people who say, "I don't have a story." Okay, I don't have a story, but eventually, if we're patient, they almost always will come out with a story, and sometimes they're whoppers. I mean, they are really incredible stories that they've been sitting on, and this has prompted them to do that.
Yeah, you never. I mean, I went to the one storytelling, and they were talking, and we were going around, and I realized as the person sitting next to me had said, "I don't have a very good story," but by the time we got to her, she told a real whopper that, and everyone was like, "That was like the best story."
Yes.
Like, she won the prize. And I think that's an interesting moment, when you're just like, wow, I've got a really neat thing to share.
And the other interesting moment is when you say, I really want to hone my story, and realize that you should give yourself time with that story and come back to it and tell it in different kind of settings, and kind of therefore really move to the place where it's. I grew up in the Midwest, and what often passed for conversation in my community was people doing what I call one-upsmanship.
Oh, okay.
Or layering. They tell a story, and they say, "Well, you should think about, you should hear what I happen to be," and then it goes like this, and then someone else, and it almost swore me off of stories when I was a kid, if that's what this is all about. But it isn't. It's about people getting in touch with their own story and feeling free to be able to do that. Anything else that you'd like to share before we come to a wrap-up time?
I think what's most interesting is how, since I've met you, I've been much more tuned into that there are moments where when there wasn't clarity on my part, that I wasn't sharing my story. And so instead of just sort of imparting the facts, that there needed to be a story that went with it. And I think that's interesting, especially with my select board work, but also with my business. All of a sudden social media became a little easier because I realized that it needed a bit of storytelling. It wasn't just a picture or a little bit of, I was doing this today, that there's should be a part of the story, and that's what people are interested in, those kind of moments. That it wasn't just, this object, it was why I chose that object to show everyone is the reason that they would pay attention. And that helps also with my family and my children. And so at the dinner table now, I don't just tell what happened that day, I try and tell the story of what happened that day.
Oh, that's a great summary, and that's a marvelous way for us to stop. I'd like to continue talking, but
that sounds great.
But we will do it again in meetings, off meetings, and we'll do it here in front of the camera sometime.
That sounds great. Thank you so much,
So
Len.
thank you for coming today.
I'm honored.
And we're welcome, folks. Just keep coming back, telling stories.